In this webinar, we'll cover each of the 5 trust services criteria that are possibilities for inclusion in your organization's SOC 2 report. We'll discuss what each of them entail and whether or not your organization should consider including them in your report. Before we get started, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Dustin Farthing. I'm a senior manager with LBMC Information Security. I work in our IT assurance practice and primarily serve in our SOC and internal audit service lines. So the 5 trust services criteria are security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. Choosing which of these to include in the scope of your SOC 2 examination is an important decision, and it's a key step in the planning process. This decision is often based on the nature of the services that are provided, any contractual obligations with customers, or sometimes the organization's budget for the SOC report. Let's step through each of the trust services criteria to give an overview of each and when it's appropriate to use them. The security trust services criteria. What is it? Security, also known as the common criteria, focuses on how your organization is keeping your information and systems protected. The security criteria covers the basis for ensuring that customer information is protected during its collection or creation, its use in processing, in transmission, and in storage. The security criteria also addresses that the systems that are used to process, transmit, or store customer information are protected. This is confirmed through controls that are established to cover enterprise governance processes such as risk management, logical and physical access, change management, and system operations. The security trust services criteria is a very substantial effort and involves not only your IT development and infrastructure teams, but also HR, upper management, and operations teams. The security criteria is referred to as the common criteria because security is considered to be foundational to all of the trust services criteria, in that you can't have confidentiality without security, or you can't have privacy without security, and so on. Therefore, security is included in every SOC 2 report by default. Availability is focused on ensuring that customer information and the systems that are used to process, transmit, or store customer information remain available for operation. Controls related to the availability trust services criteria are focused on demonstrating that systems maintain operational uptime and performance. The availability criteria doesn't define a specific minimum acceptable performance level, but rather it addresses whether controls are in place to ensure continued system operation. The availability criteria covers system performance monitoring, data backup processes, environmental protections, and recovery plans. You should consider including the availability criteria in your report if you have any contractual obligations related to uptime metrics, RTO or RPO, or if you have any requirements around downtime or any other SLAs. When it comes to adding on other trust services criteria beyond security, even if you don't have any contractual obligations, adding other criteria can be a differentiator in the marketplace. If you have solid processes already in place for monitoring system performance and uptime, if you have effective capacity management tools and processes, and if you have a disaster recovery and business continuity plan in place and perform formal testing exercises frequently, including availability could be an addition that provides your customers additional peace of mind and offers a competitive advantage for you. Plus, adding the availability criteria is not really too significant of a lift beyond the security criteria. If you have these processes in place already, you should seriously consider adding this, as the incremental effort will be relatively minor and won't create that much additional audit strain. The confidentiality trust services criteria deals with the protection of sensitive information throughout its life cycle, from its collection or creation all the way through to disposal. Controls for this criteria are likely to relate to how confidential information is identified, how long it's retained, how it's protected, and how destruction or disposal of the confidential data is managed. The specific requirements may be defined by laws or regulation that the organization is subject to, or any specific contractual obligations. Your organization should consider including confidentiality if you are storing any of your customer sensitive information, or if you have an NDA in place with your customers. You should also consider adding this one if there are any requirements in place to dispose of sensitive data. Even if you're not contractually obligated to include this criteria, readers of the report are going to be interested in the processes your organization has implemented to protect their sensitive data. An important consideration is whether your organization is managing confidential or sensitive data for your customers, or if you're actually managing personal information. Confidentiality deals with protections around sensitive data, such as transaction details or legal documents or business plans, whereas the Privacy Trust Services criteria deals with protections around personal information, such as names or social security numbers. We'll cover more on privacy in just a bit. So, as with availability, confidentiality is not that significant of a lift beyond security in that it's not a large undertaking to include this one. If you currently have processes in place to manage confidential information, such as encryption of data at rest and in transit, if you have data retention policies and disposal processes, you should seriously consider including confidentiality in your SOC 2 report. So, processing integrity deals with the processing of data or transactions and the validation that they're complete, valid, accurate, and timely. It also deals with how the relevant data is stored and maintained to ensure the integrity of the data. Processing integrity controls typically involve the validation of data inputs and outputs, edit checks, reconciliations, and other similar processes to ensure the integrity of the data. Controls implemented to satisfy the processing integrity criteria are generally going to be very specific to the services provided to customers and the systems that are used. Your organization should consider including processing integrity in your SOC 2 if you're performing any sort of transaction or data processing for your customers. Some examples of organizations that processing integrity would be relevant to are those that provide payroll services or billing services or analytics or any other financial and data processing services. So, unlike availability and confidentiality, processing integrity is more involved as it focuses on validating the completeness, accuracy, and timeliness of data inputs, data manipulations, and data outputs. These processes will be very specific to the service being provided to customers and the systems that are used. While there may be more effort involved if you're processing transactions or data for your customers, including this criteria in your report will demonstrate to customers that you're doing it effectively. The Privacy Trust Services criteria deals with the protection of personal information throughout its life cycle, including the safeguards around how that personal information is collected and retained, how it's disclosed, and how it's disposed of. Personal information means any information related to an individual that can be used to identify them either directly or indirectly. This can include the person's name, their social security number, their address, their driver's license number, anything that can be used to identify someone. The controls and processes that are generally included with privacy deal with how privacy practices are communicated, how consent for collection and retention is obtained, how data retention and removal is handled, how access to personal information is managed, how data disclosures are handled, how the organization ensures that the personal information is accurate and current, and how the organization manages complaints and disputes. The Privacy Trust Services criteria should be considered for inclusion in the SOC 2 report if your organization is involved in the creation, collection, transmission, use, or retention of personal information. You may also want to consider including privacy if you provide any services to customers outside of the United States, as other countries tend to have very specific privacy laws and regulations and are generally more stringent with these types of requirements than we currently are in the US. So, as we discussed when we were covering confidentiality, privacy deals only with personal information. If your organization deals with sensitive information that isn't able to be used to identify an individual, then including the confidentiality criteria is likely the better approach. However, if you're using personal information in the performance of your services, then including the privacy criteria will likely be important and useful for your customers. I will say the Privacy Trust Services criteria is quite extensive and takes a significant amount of time to prepare for and implement. In addition to your security team, you'll likely have to involve your organization's legal counsel in this effort. So, in summary, when deciding which trust services criteria to include in your SOC report, think about the nature of the services your organization is providing to your customers and the types of data that's being used. Consider any contractual obligations that your organization is subject to and which are most important to your customer base. Demonstrating a mature security program allows for a competitive advantage in the marketplace. Also, keep in mind that only the security trust services criteria is required and all the others are optional. Overall, the decision will be based on the maturity of your security program, your budget, and other marketplace demands such as contractual obligations and the ability to distinguish your organization from your competitors. So with that, this concludes this webinar on the 5 trust services criteria and when to include them in your organization's SOC 2 report. We'd love to help your organization with this important decision. Please feel free to reach out to myself or our practice leader, Drew Hendrickson, with any questions that you might have. You can also visit us on the web at lbmcsecurity.com.